Hello, my friends. On this sultry summer day, I thought I would share with you a thought about the sun. You know, in the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes, Solomon once wrote, "There is nothing new under the sun." And maybe you've heard that before. From Solomon's observations and understanding, what he was saying was what one generation experiences isn't unique. Previous generations have probably experienced similar things. In the early chapters of the book of Genesis, we see the account of creation. God created the heavens and the earth. He created everything from the oceans to the land, plant life, animal life, and ultimately, He created human beings also. He created Adam and Eve. And Genesis also tells us that Adam and Eve had two sons. And I bet that many of you know who those two sons were. They were Cain and Abel. And I bet you also know that at one point, Cain kills his brother Abel. But did you know that it only took 9 generations after that for people to become so corrupt that God was sorry that He had ever created mankind? Now, if you can imagine what 9 generations are, it's a rather short period of time. In fact, it's that period of time from your great-great-grandparents to your great-great-grandchildren. So when you look at it in those terms, it seems like a short period of time. 9 generations took us from Adam to Noah. And Noah is who I'd really like to talk a little bit about today, because I think he has something to say to you and to me in our current context of what's happening in our country and what's happening in our world today. I wanted to begin in Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 and 6. And what I'd like to do is read a little bit for you and then share some commentary on what has been written. But this is what it says in Genesis 6, beginning at verses 5 and 6. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that He had made man on the earth, and it grieved Him to His heart. You know, I don't think this was what God had hoped for when He created our world and when He created humans. In 9 generations, humans had gotten to the point that evil intentions was what now defined them. And I'm sure that God was heartbroken with humanity, just as a human parent is heartbroken with a child when they're caught up and consumed by something evil. I'm sure that God had wanted better for His creation. Now, Genesis 6 continues the story, and this is what it says. So the Lord said, "I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them." But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, "I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth." So in just 9 short generations, people have become universally corrupt, and God couldn't stand what mankind had become. Now, at first blush, it looks as though God's plan is to exterminate mankind. But as we continue to read, we see that God's purpose was not extermination, but regeneration of mankind. And he knows he can begin with Noah. Noah had found favor in God's eyes, and Noah, for the very first time, would experience the depth of God's grace and mercy. But what made Noah so different? Well, we're told he was blameless in his generation. He walked with God, and that made him a righteous man. With the world being full of unrighteous people, Noah stood out like a sore thumb. He was somebody that God could use to restart the world with. He was somebody that God could use to make a difference in the world, in a world that had seemingly gone crazy. Well, God has a plan, and he gives instructions to Noah. And I bet most of us are going to be familiar with what this plan is. It's found in Genesis chapter 6, verses 14 to 16. This is what it says. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Its breadth, 50 cubits. And its height, 30 cubits. Make a roof in the ark and finish it to a cubit above and set the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. So that's something you're probably familiar with, the instructions for Noah building the ark. Noah was to build this huge boat. It was a boat big enough to hold enough people, enough animals, and enough food to begin the regeneration process. Do you realize Noah was the only person God could use to do this? Noah was unique in his culture. God couldn't use anybody else. Noah was the only righteous man of his day. Now our story continues in Genesis chapter 6, verse 17. This is what it says. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die. Wow. Can you imagine being in Noah's sandals and hearing that from God? It would all seem pretty daunting, wouldn't it? All the people, all the animals, everything would be destroyed. And the regeneration of the world would fall on Noah's shoulders. How would you like to have been Noah? The story continues in Genesis 6, verses 18 to 21. This is what it says. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you and your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female, of the birds according to their kind, and of the animals according to their kind, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind, 2 of every sort shall come into you to keep them alive. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Here, God was making a commitment to and a promise to Noah. It included the preservation of life on earth. The story continues in Genesis 6, verse 22, and it tells us, Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. Noah took it all on his shoulders with God's promise and God's provision. He did everything God commanded him. Some of it might have seemed irrational for the time. Some of it might have seemed ludicrous or crazy, as though it didn't make any sense. Just like when God would save the world through Jesus, through sacrificing his own son for the sins of the world. Noah knew that God knew what was best for Noah and what was best for the world. And that brings us to where we are today. Our world seems crazy in many ways. Our world seems corrupt in many ways. People seem corrupt in many ways. But you and I, we have the opportunity to be Noah to our world today. The Apostle Peter gives us insight into how you and I can be Noahs in our world. It's found in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 5. This is what Peter says. If he, God, did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness, with 7 others, when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly. Did you catch that? You and I can be Noah in our world today by being heralds of righteousness. Do you think the people of Noah's day wanted to hear anything about righteousness? Probably not. And many in our world today, they probably don't want to hear about righteousness either. But Noah was a herald, and God has you and me here in our world to be heralds also. Now, a herald is simply an announcer, a proclaimer, a town crier, if you will. Now, much of the time, we may not feel like there's anything we can do about our world. Maybe when we're watching the news, when we're reading the news, but our lives can exemplify what righteousness is, what a commitment to God is, by what we say and how we behave. You know, Solomon wrote, "There's nothing new under the sun." What's happening in our country and our world right now has happened in the past also. There have been times of tumult and turmoil and rampant unrighteousness, but God has always had his people for such a time as this, to be heralds of righteousness, of how to live a righteous life, even when others aren't, to reflect God's glory, his grace, his love, his mercy to our world. So I hope and pray that you and I, we will be heralds of our generations. We will be the Noahs of our generation. Until the next time, God bless you.